Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the chill of a medieval monastery, where the only thing louder than the silence is the sound of quills scratching against parchment. You're bundled in a robe that smells faintly of smoke and dust, your breath visible in the air, and in front of you sits a book so large it's practically furniture. The room is dim, lit only by a few sputtering candles and the weak gray glow of dawn slipping through a narrow window. A bell tolls somewhere in the distance, low, slow, deliberate. And no, you're not dreaming. This is the world of medieval librarians. And tonight, you're going to discover how they handled books that were heavier than the monks themselves. You probably won't survive this. Honestly, one false move and you'll throw your back out trying to turn a page. The Latin's confusing, the lighting's terrible, and the heating system? Non-existent. But hey, at least there's no email. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all drift off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the cold stone floor, following the sound of rustling parchment and clinking chains. The air smells of damp wood and boiled ink. You pass through a heavy wooden door and step into the scriptorium, a vast, echoey room where books are copied by hand, candlelight flickering over endless desks. This is not your modern library. There's no Dewey Decimal System, no barcode scanners, no shushing librarian with a latte. Instead, there are rows of hunched figures, draped in wool robes, whispering to themselves in Latin as their quills glide steadily over parchment stretched taut on wooden frames. The silence isn't enforced, it's embedded in the very stone around you. You walk between the desks. One monk is copying a page from the Book of Psalms, his eyes squinting from years of dim reading. Another is grinding pigment for the illuminated capital that will take 3 days to finish. There's a rhythm here, a sacred kind of slowness. But then you notice something strange. Near the back of the room, a young novice is hunched not over a writing desk, but under one. You bend down and hear a grunt. "It's too heavy," he whispers, his voice muffled by the floor. "I can't lift it." You peer under the desk and see the problem, an enormous manuscript, its binding thick, its cover decorated with brass knobs and clasps, has tipped off the reading platform and landed on his leg. You help him pull it free. Together, it takes both your arms and a full-body effort just to place it back on the stand. This, you realize, is not just a book. It's a medieval weapon of mass instruction. Here's the historical fact: medieval books, especially liturgical ones, like choir books or theological compendiums, could weigh anywhere from 20 to 80 pounds. Some were designed to be read aloud by an entire room, which meant bigger pages, bigger text, and an even bigger burden on whoever had to lug it across the hall. And the scriptoriums? They weren't built for ergonomics. The desks were sturdy but plain, often just a flat plank on legs, with no cushioning, no adjustments, no mercy. The floors were stone, the chairs were wooden, and if your back gave out mid-transcription, you were probably just offered a firmer stool. Historians still argue whether the extreme size of some volumes was intentional, to deter theft, to aid group reading, or simply the result of limited parchment availability that demanded fewer but much larger pages. Whatever the reason, these weren't books for bedtime. These were books for the bold. One fringe detail you overhear. Some monks were assigned lifting partners, a kind of medieval buddy system, whose sole job was to help hoist manuscripts onto desks at the start of a shift. The gym bros of the scriptorium, if you will. Minus the protein shakes. Plus a lot of back pain. As you settle onto a creaky bench beside a weary monk, you glance at the book before him. Its pages are yellowed, its ink still gleaming. He leans forward, sighs deeply, and mutters, "Only 400 pages left." You nod slowly. Time slows. Your shoulders relax. The candle flickers. And somewhere in the corridor beyond, a bell tolls again, signaling the next reading hour, and maybe the next sore shoulder. You shift quietly on the monk's bench, the wood creaking beneath you like it's centuries older than the monastery itself, which, to be fair, it might be. Beside you, the monk scratches his nose, squints at the page again, and shifts his weight with the resigned patience of a man who's been sitting on the same uncomfortable stool since sunrise. Your knees already ache. You glance around. The scriptorium is a sea of hunched backs, muttering mouths, and narrow eyes. Each monk wears the same woolen robe cinched with a rope belt, the hood pulled low, not for mystery, but because it's cold. Like, painfully cold. It's the kind of chill that seeps into your knuckles and makes your teeth chatter quietly enough that you start hoping someone mistakes it for prayer. Then your eye catches one particular librarian, a senior scribe, judging by the elaborate embroidery on his sleeve, rocking gently on a peculiar three-legged stool. It's narrow, a bit wobbly, and shaped like someone tried to reinvent the idea of discomfort. He keeps shifting from side to side, trying to find that mythical sweet spot where the blood returns to both legs at the same time. Welcome to the ergonomics of the Middle Ages. See, back then, reading and writing weren't just intellectual tasks, they were physical trials. Desks were flat or slightly angled, built more for durability than posture. And seating? Let's just say lumbar support hadn't been invented yet. Monks could spend 8 to 12 hours a day bent over pages, squinting at Gothic script while perched on stools that looked like punishment devices. You try one yourself. It immediately punishes you. There's a quiet rhythm to the room. Scritch of quills. Creak of benches. Occasional sighs that sound like someone's giving up hope, but really, it's just someone realizing they used the wrong color ink. Next to you, the monk lifts his page to inspect it. A fleck of dried ink falls off, landing on the edge of his sandal. It's always the O's, he mutters. They bleed too wide. You nod sagely. You have no idea what he means. And then, thud. Another monk attempts to stand up after hours of sitting, but his legs give out halfway and he folds back into his stool like a wet blanket. No one reacts. This is normal. Here's your mainstream fact: most scriptoriums followed a daily rhythm broken into reading, writing, and prayer sessions. Monks weren't just scribes, they were timekeepers, too. Each task was tethered to bells that rang at set intervals. In some places, sand timers and candle clocks were used, but more often, you just listened for the chant that signaled the end of your lower back's will to live. You wander toward the edge of the room where a large, cracked window lets in more light. There, two monks share a wide wooden desk. One is reading aloud from a text too fragile to be handled. The other transcribes. It's a back and forth so quiet it feels like a lullaby. Occasionally, the reader mumbles a correction. Occasionally, the scribe grumbles back. You overhear one joke, or maybe it's real: when books get too big, we just memorize the heavy parts and leave the rest behind. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. Fringe fact for the hour. Some monasteries experimented with reclining desks. Yes, imagine lying slightly tilted back, book perched on a slanted board, like an early version of a reading lounger, but instead of a cozy blanket, you have a 30-pound manuscript balanced on your chest and absolutely no forgiveness if you drop it. Historians still debate whether these furniture tweaks were innovations or eccentricities. Was it comfort? Or just a desperate attempt to keep monks from collapsing into their ink? You wander past another monk who's drawing marginal illustrations, a grumpy rabbit holding a sword, for some reason. He catches you staring in deadpans. It's symbolic. Of course it is. The bell rings again, sharp, clear, echoing through the long stone hall. Time to stretch. Or rather, time to almost stretch and then remember you haven't stood upright in 3 hours. You step outside for a moment, into the cloistered garden, just to shake the pins and needles from your legs. The cold is crisp. Your breath clouds the air. You look up. The sky is gray. The trees are bare. Somewhere nearby, someone sneezes dramatically. And back inside, those poor monks are shifting on their stools again. One by one. Every robe swaying like the sails of ships that have forgotten the ocean. You return to the scriptorium just in time to witness a logistical crisis in slow motion. At the far end of the hall, two monks are wrestling with what can only be described as the literary version of a dinner table, one enormous book, bound in thick oak boards and reinforced with iron clasps, balanced precariously between them like they're carrying a sleeping dragon. The younger monk wobbles. The older one scowls. You rush over, but not fast enough to stop it. Thud. The book lands on a low bench with a sound that echoes off the walls, dust puffing up in a holy cloud around it. They groan in unison. Not out of guilt, but because they know they'll have to move it again later. This isn't rare. In the Middle Ages, books, especially those copied for churches, cathedral libraries, and monastic reference collections, weren't made to be portable. They were precious, elaborate, and often downright gargantuan. Some took decades to complete, filled with the kind of ornate, full-color illuminations that turned a single page into a backache. You step closer. The binding is thick, the spine hand-stitched with thick cord, and the cover bears a brass medallion engraved with a saint's face that stares directly into your soul. Don't touch the corners, the older monk warns. They bend. You nod solemnly. You weren't planning on touching anything, let alone something heavier than your entire travel bag. He points to a lectern nearby. That's where it lives now. But of course, the lectern's already taken by another book, this one open to a section of theological commentary that's been half-transcribed onto parchment by the red-eyed scribe hunched in front of it. For more folios, he says to no one. Then sneezes. You offer to help move the first book to the corner table instead. The three of you lift it again, arms straining. It's surprisingly warm, as if all the candlelight it's absorbed over the years has never really left. Here's a proper historical note: some choir books, meant to be read by an entire group of monks standing in formation, could be several feet tall, with text large enough to be read from yards away. These were usually propped upright on heavy wooden lecterns called pulpit desks, designed at just the right angle to prevent tipping, slipping, or spontaneous monk squashing. You spot one now near the center of the room. It's massive. It looks like a picnic table tipped upright. The book resting on it is open to a chant, with musical notation so large it feels like it's yelling at you in Latin. Only 4 monks can sing from this one, a librarian murmurs. Any more and someone faints. Historians still argue whether these supersized books were intended purely for utility or if their size was part of their mystique, larger books being harder to steal, yes, but also symbolic of divine authority. A big book meant big truths. Or at least, big chances of a hernia. One fringe theory suggests some of the largest books were made deliberately oversized to discourage personal reading. They required group access, supervision, and an architectural support system. In other words, they weren't for private reflection, they were for performance. You're led to another room, smaller, quieter, colder. It's lined with stone shelves, and each shelf holds exactly 1 book. These volumes don't lie flat. They sit upright, like towers. One even has its own stool, like a noble pet. In the center of the room, there's a table with a strange leather cushion mounted on a board. You lean closer and realize it's a lifting pad, meant to brace the weight of a book against the stomach while you move it from shelf to desk. A sort of book baby carrier, minus the snuggles. A monk demonstrates. He hoists a tome onto the pad, locks a strap around his waist, and shuffles like a man who knows exactly how many vertebrae he can risk for the sake of a 12th century commentary on Job. You murmur a compliment. He grunts in return. There's something oddly reverent about the entire process, like carrying a relic, or preparing for a medieval strongman contest. The books are so heavy, so detailed, so irreplaceable, that each movement around them becomes a ritual. By the time you return to the main hall, the 2 monks from earlier are sitting beside their oversized book, arms draped over their knees, breathing hard. That's the light one says. You raise an eyebrow. He points down the hall. Wait until you see the Bible of Worms. You make a mental note to not see the Bible of Worms. You decide it's best to avoid the so-called Bible of Worms, for now. Honestly, any book that requires a warning label in casual monk conversation is not on your bucket list today. Instead, you drift toward a corner of the scriptorium where a monk is adjusting what looks like a slanted wooden structure. It's not a desk, not quite a lectern, it resembles something between a pulpit and a sloped dinner table. You found a pulpit desk. Perched atop it is a manuscript so wide it spills slightly over the edges, its pages drooping like the ears of a tired hound. But here's the clever part, the desk's angle, steep, intentional, and bolstered with two wooden crossbeams, is perfect for countering gravity. The book doesn't need to be lifted or propped or held. It rests. Like a smug cat. The monk places a cushion beneath his elbows, opens the book slowly with both hands, grunting only once, and begins to read. This is the medieval solution to book fatigue, make the furniture smarter. Instead of shrinking the books, which was often impossible due to the sheer amount of content, ornate illustrations, and the thick vellum pages, libraries began designing desks specifically for immovable tomes. You don't move the book. The book moves you. You step closer and notice not just the incline of the desk but also a groove carved into the top rail, where readers can prop an arm or guide a ruler. Little details. Practical flourishes. The medieval version of user-friendly. Don't lean on it, the monk says softly without looking up. You freeze. Last time someone leaned, the corner cracked. It took 2 weeks to repair the varnish and 3 days for Brother Marcus to walk straight again. Point taken. One fascinating bit of trivia. These desks weren't just static pieces of furniture. In some monasteries, they could be tilted at multiple angles using a wooden wedge system, sort of like a primitive adjustable laptop stand. Some even had small attached lamps fueled by fish oil for better visibility during winter evenings. Smelly? Yes. But effective. You notice another monk standing at a similar pulpit desk across the room, flipping slowly through a bound glossary of medicinal herbs. Each page is stiff with gloss and weight, and he uses a small iron pointer to avoid transferring skin oils onto the vellum. His sleeves are tied back with ribbon. His face is about 6 inches from the text. He does not blink often. Historians still argue whether these pulpit desks were built standard across Europe or designed locally by each monastery's carpenter. Some were made from oak, others from walnut or pine, and nearly all of them had small side rails to keep books from sliding off like overambitious pancakes. You take a seat nearby and try to imagine your modern self working this way. There's no scrolling. No bookmarks. No Ctrl+F. If you want to find a passage, good luck. You'll be here for a while. Probably grow a beard by the time you locate your footnote. The monk beside you chuckles, as if reading your thoughts. The good thing about long books, he says, is you never run out. A younger novice approaches and asks if he may borrow the manuscript for afternoon reading. The monk frowns, glances at the desk, then sighs. No. It stays. Apparently, some books simply did not move. Not because of theft concerns, but because the risk of injury, to person or paper, was too high. Instead, readers came to the book. Like medieval library tourism. A fringe detail. In a few abbeys, special socks or slippers were required when using the pulpit desks, soft soles only, so that readers wouldn't knock over the bookstand or scuff the stone floor during particularly emotional passages. Imagine tiptoeing into a room just to read about St. Augustine and accidentally violating dress code. You notice a leather strap hanging from the side of the desk. It's used to help close the manuscript slowly, applying pressure evenly so the pages don't warp or tear. Closing a book here is like tucking in a child. Gently. Deliberately. With a prayer or two. As the reader moves on to the next page, you watch him use 2 hands, a flat iron tool, and a breath of warm air to loosen the parchment. He turns it like he's flipping gold leaf. The page falls open with a soft shfff. You exhale too. Not from effort, just because it feels right. The desk creaks again. The monk leans forward. His eyes narrow. And somewhere outside, a bell tolls. Another hour passes. Another page begins. You drift away from the pulpit desk and toward the far wall of the scriptorium, where things begin to look different. The shelves here are lined with books, yes, but not in the freestanding, dainty fashion you might expect. Instead, each manuscript is bound by a thick iron chain, secured to a heavy wooden rod bolted into the wall or reading bench. Welcome to the world of chained libraries, where books don't leave the room, and freedom of movement is considered a risk to both parchment and morality. You bend down to examine one of the iron links. It's cold, heavy, and just long enough to allow someone to open the book and read it, but not walk off with it. Efficient. Slightly ominous. Like a bookstore run by prison guards. One monk walks past you with a key ring so large it jingles like a tambourine. He stops at a desk, unlocks a chain, and shifts a volume into place. Borrowing, he mutters, is a modern disease. You smile nervously. He doesn't. The logic behind the chains is clear. These books were hand-copied over years, sometimes decades, and cost more than most peasants made in a lifetime. A single error, a smudged page, a missing chapter, any of it could ruin months of labor. So instead of risk the manuscript disappearing into the hands of a careless friar or an overly enthusiastic noble, they bolted it down. You want to read? You go to the book. It doesn't come to you. One shelf holds books so large the chains look more like leashes for guard dogs. Another section, by contrast, features slimmer volumes with daintier chains, texts used more often, perhaps, but still not trusted enough to roam freely. Here's your mainstream fact: chained libraries were most common between the 15th and 17th centuries, especially in cathedrals, university towns, and monasteries with extensive collections. They weren't just practical, they were also a warning. To steal a chained book was to violate a sacred order. Some libraries even inscribed curses inside the covers: "Whosoever steals this book, may he be roasted on a gridiron in hell." Subtle. And here's a fringe detail for your sleepy amusement: some monks were so paranoid about book theft that they added fake chains to decoy books, empty covers or obsolete treatises chained up purely for intimidation. Imagine reaching for a dusty old hymnal and realizing it's just a block of wood in a fancy jacket. Historians still argue whether the chaining systems were primarily deterrence or logistical necessities. Was this medieval paranoia, or just a way to prevent books from migrating into someone's satchel during a suspiciously long lunch? You walk farther down the hall and discover a desk with a curious groove running along its edge. Turns out, that's the slot where the chain runs when the book is in use, so the reader can slide the volume up and down the length of the bench without strangling it in metal. You try it yourself. It's surprisingly smooth. Across the room, a younger monk fumbles with a chain that's gotten twisted, the book awkwardly half-suspended in midair like it's trying to escape. A senior librarian approaches, sighs, and begins untangling the mess with the expertise of someone who's done this too many times. "These books," he mutters, "have minds of their own." You can't help but wonder what modern librarians would do with chained Kindles. Probably start a riot. Just then, another reader enters the room with a cart. On it sits a particularly thick volume, metal-cornered, triple-clasped, and clearly resentful about being moved. The monk parks it beside a long table, hooks the chain into its mount, and walks away. The chain creaks like an old floorboard as it settles into place. You sit and open the book, slowly. The chain tugs gently, reminding you who's really in control. The room is quiet. A few pages flutter under the breeze from a cracked window. The air smells like dust, brass, and cold parchment. The chains do not rattle unless you make them. You lean back, hands folded. Eyes heavy. And above you, the iron links gleam in the candlelight, quiet sentinels keeping watch over a world of knowledge too heavy, too fragile, and far too precious to ever wander away. You leave the chained books behind, their quiet clinking still echoing in your ears, and step into a side alcove of the library where the floors are more worn and the air smells faintly of beeswax and ink. The space feels different, less ceremonial, more practical. And from the moment you step inside, you hear it. Creowalk. It's not the wind. It's not a door. It's the desks. You watch as a monk leans over a heavy wooden station, shifting a monstrous tome across a sloped surface. The desk groans, almost like it's protesting the weight. The monk pauses, nudges the book with his elbow, and it creaks again, long, mournful, and oddly musical. This is the realm of scriptoriums that squeaked. The desks here weren't made for elegance. They were constructed from thick, sturdy planks, sometimes repurposed from other furniture or leftover timber from church repairs. Some of them tilt. Some of them roll. A few even have crude pivot joints so they can angle up or down depending on the size of the book being read or copied. You run your hand across one of the surfaces. It's not smooth, it's warped with age, stained with ink, and worn into a slight dip from centuries of elbows. At the far end, you spot a candle sconce with a wax drip so solidified it looks like it's been frozen mid-drip for 200 years. A monk approaches, dragging a stool behind him. He places it beside the desk and climbs up, not because the desk is especially high, but because the book on it is so large, he needs elevation just to see the top of the page. The book groans again as he flips it open. Some desks have added reinforcement, wooden blocks nailed underneath, thin iron braces bent into shape, and in one corner, a rope system that looks suspiciously like it was borrowed from the bell tower. For counterbalancing, the monk tells you. Or stopping it from falling on your foot. Here's your mainstream fact: many monastic libraries developed specialized furniture for oversized texts. Desks were custom-built to support massive volumes without damaging the bindings, often tilted to prevent page sag or structural strain. In wealthier monasteries, some even featured footrests or knee boards so the reader could support themselves during long reading sessions. You kneel beside one such desk and discover an odd lever on the side. A monk passing by leans down and demonstrates. It's a tilt adjuster. Primitive, yes, but effective. It lets the reader lower the book's angle so the top half doesn't feel like it's 2 villages away. The desk shifts with a grunt of wood, the adjustment causing the floorboards to creak in response. The building seems to groan with it, everything here has a voice. One of the scribes nearby winces as his desk shifts ever so slightly under his manuscript. "She's temperamental today," he says, patting the plank. You're not sure if he's joking. You hear about a desk that once collapsed under the weight of 2 open volumes and a novice who leaned too far while sipping boiled milk. No one was hurt. The milk, however, was never recovered. Historians still debate whether these squeaky, tilting desks were a transitional stage toward more refined reading furniture or simply the medieval version of, "It works, don't fix it." What is certain is that many desks were retrofitted over generations, patched, reinforced, and altered as book sizes changed and needs evolved. A delightful fringe detail. In a few abbeys, squeaks became timing cues. One monastery in northern England reportedly used the loudest desk creak in the room to signal when the lunch hour had officially arrived. Monks would wait. And when Brother Gerald's desk moaned loud enough, they'd rise in unison. Efficiency, with a side of squeaky drama. You sit at one of the desks and lean gently forward. The surface shifts with a soft groan. You close your eyes, listening. The wood seems to sigh beneath you, like it remembers every monk who's ever sat here, every candle that's ever burned low beside its edge. A page turns. A quill scratches. And somewhere in the beams above, a pigeon coos sleepily. You feel yourself start to drift, rocked by the ancient rhythm of groaning planks, rustling parchment, and the soft, tired breath of men who've spent their lives reading things too heavy to carry, but too precious to ignore. You leave the groaning desks behind and follow the uneven flagstone hallway toward the southern wing of the monastery, where things take a more mobile turn. Quite literally. You hear the rumble before you see it. Clunk. Squeak. Clunk. Squeak. And then he rounds the corner, a monk with a shaved head, red cheeks, and the resigned gait of someone who has given up trying to explain himself. In front of him, a wooden cart. On the cart, a single, enormous book, strapped down with 2 leather belts and surrounded by bundles of wool to cushion the jostle. "Pardon," he mutters, navigating a tight corner. "Delivery for the infirmary." You step aside, blinking. That was a book on wheels. Welcome to the world of monks with wheelbarrows. In some monasteries, particularly those with libraries spread across multiple buildings, or in sprawling compounds where reference texts had to travel, moving oversized volumes became a physical event. And since few scribes could carry such monsters solo, especially across slippery stone courtyards, carts became the medieval librarian's secret weapon. You follow the monk as he pushes the cart through a side cloister. The wheels creak, the cart shudders over each uneven slab, and the book, despite all precautions, threatens to slide an inch with every bump. "Lost one last winter," he mutters. "Corner too sharp. Book went left, I went right." You don't ask what happened to the book. At the next stop, a fellow monk helps unload the volume using a small footstool and what appears to be a rolled-up rug as a landing cushion. With the book now positioned safely on a stone table, they both let out synchronized groans of relief and stare at it like they'd just carried an anvil across town. Here's your mainstream fact: monastic communities in medieval Europe often had to transport large texts between study rooms, scriptoria, libraries, or even medical wings. Books weren't always stationary. But moving them required forethought, muscle, and, yes, wheeled assistance. Some carts were specially modified for this task, with padded trays and angled supports to prevent shifting. One fringe theory even suggests that some monks developed custom wheelbarrows with weight distribution designed specifically for codices, sort of like the medieval bookmobile, but with no windows and a high chance of getting a splinter. Historians still argue whether these mobile methods were formalized across religious orders or simply improvised by overworked monks tired of hernias. There are even woodcut illustrations from the later Middle Ages showing carts full of manuscripts, pushed by red-faced, slightly hunched men in habits. It's hard not to feel sympathy. You get a turn yourself. The cart is lighter than it looks, until you try to stop it on a slope, and then it insists on continuing the journey without you. One monk steadies the front while you regain control. "Always brake with your foot," he says. "And never, ever let it near the laundry stairs." In another corner of the compound, you see a different transport system, a wooden tray attached to a rope pulley that lowers books down from an upper library loft. A monk above gives you a wave and slowly lowers a bundled manuscript in a basket like it's a fragile kitten. You watch it descend, creak by creak, until it lands with a soft bump on a straw pad. Another monk retrieves it and immediately pulls out a cloth to check for dust. "Not all books get carts," he says. "Only the moody ones." You believe him. Here's a delightful detail: some monasteries reportedly had book wranglers, junior scribes whose entire job was simply moving, monitoring, and positioning the heavy volumes between locations. If a book fell, they were responsible. If a page was torn in transit, they'd answer for it. High stakes for low-speed transport. You find a quiet spot under an archway and watch as another cart rolls past. This one has 2 books, smaller, stacked like treasure. The monk guiding it whistles softly to himself, a gentle little tune that sounds like it's been passed down through centuries of library hauling. He nods at you. "Quiet cargo," he jokes. And then he's gone, wheels creaking into the distance. The air stills. The cloister empties. And you sit in silence, imagining the endless journeys of books on carts, down halls, through archways, past gardens, across seasons, forever moving, forever guarded. In this world, words are heavy. But they're never left behind. You wander farther into the maze of monastery corridors, following the flicker of torchlight and the faint scent of old parchment mixed with lavender wax. This wing feels secretive. The noise of groaning desks and squeaky carts fades behind you, replaced by soft footfalls and the occasional sound of wood sliding against stone. And then you see it. Behind a tapestry depicting Saint Jerome elbowing a lion, don't ask, a narrow door creaks open to reveal a hidden room no wider than a pantry. Inside, it's dim, and the air is thick with the hush of things no one once found. You step in slowly and discover what must be the library's most protected nook, the secret shelves and fold-out walls. This is where the heaviest books go to rest. Not on chains. Not on carts. But tucked away, out of circulation, out of sight. You run your fingers along the edge of a wooden shelf and find it doesn't stop where you expect. With the gentlest push, the shelf swings out, revealing a concealed inner compartment, like a medieval Murphy bed, but for books. The monk beside you raises an eyebrow. That's the Gospel of Matthew and Mark. Luke and John are on the other side. You nod, whispering a reverent "of course," as if this were completely normal. He steps past you and gently opens another fold-out wall. It swings down like a drawbridge, revealing a slanted surface with an open book already resting on it. The book is vast, bound in dark leather and capped with dull iron corners. It glows slightly in the candlelight, as though it's exhaling the warmth of previous readers. Here's your mainstream fact: many monasteries with limited space developed architectural tricks to store oversized volumes. Nooks, fold-away walls, and hidden compartments allowed librarians to preserve the heaviest manuscripts without leaving them exposed to light, damp, or curious fingers. Books that weren't used frequently, but were too precious to discard, often lived in these carved-out corners. You crouch beside one hidden desk and notice faint notches on the underside. The monk explains they were counting marks, little etchings made each time the volume was consulted. Some pages are more worn than others, the ink faded slightly from fingers or perhaps from whispered breath. One shelf holds nothing but hymnals too tall for any standard storage. They sit upright in wedge-shaped cradles that prevent warping. Some are draped in linen wraps. Others rest bare, proud and upright like retired knights. You hear a whisper. It's not ghostly, it's the soft muttering of a monk behind a screen, reviewing a text aloud under his breath. You peek around and find a compact reading booth, just big enough for one. Inside is a smaller version of the fold-out wall, tilted at a precise angle, and a padded board where the monk has propped his elbows. He sees you, smiles, and continues reading, never once breaking rhythm. Historians still debate whether these secret spaces were standard library design or simply innovations of necessity, solutions to awkward angles and architectural leftovers. Some believe they were also used to protect sensitive theological texts from casual browsing or forbidden hands. One fringe detail. In certain abbeys, the fold-away compartments were reserved for volumes that had been retired, texts deemed spiritually or physically too fragile for daily use. Monks called them resting books. Some were even rumored to carry curses against those who reopened them without permission. You don't touch those shelves. Another fold-out wall contains a rotating script chart, a wheel of abbreviations, likely used by scribes who needed quick reference without flipping through 10 different books. It's like a medieval cheat sheet, tucked into a drawer that only reveals itself when you push the shelf just right. You sit quietly on a low stool, watching another monk gently fold the wall back up, the book now safely cradled inside. The panel closes with a soft click, sealing the pages inside like a breath held for centuries. The room grows quieter still. Torchlight flickers. The stone absorbs every sound. And in this hidden sanctuary of wood, wax, and worn hinges, you finally understand something. In medieval libraries, weight wasn't just a burden. It was a signal, a sign that something inside mattered enough to protect, conceal, and preserve. You exhale. And the wall doesn't creak. It whispers. You return to the main library hall, blinking against the brighter torchlight, only to be ushered toward another curious invention nestled between two windows, a wooden contraption that, at first glance, looks like a child's high chair and a coat rack had a medieval disagreement. A friar waves you over, smiling beneath a generous hood. "Come," he says, patting the odd machine. "You'll want to try the cradle." The wooden book cradle, as it's called, sits atop a wide-legged frame and features a padded base angled ever so slightly upward. A shallow lip holds the book in place, while two adjustable wooden arms extend on either side, elbow levers, the monk explains, though frankly, they look like props from an avant-garde puppet theater. You sit down, tentatively. The monk places a hefty book, likely a devotional or medical manual, into the cradle and adjusts the levers so that your forearms now rest comfortably alongside the page. "There," he says, tightening a rope behind your chair. "No stooping. No drooping. Just glide." And, you glide. Your arms, at perfect height, allow you to turn pages without shifting your back. The book doesn't slip, the cradle doesn't creak, and for once, your neck isn't doing all the heavy lifting. It's bizarrely luxurious. Here's your mainstream historical fact: as manuscripts grew heavier and more complex, monasteries began devising support systems to aid reading without risking damage to the book, or the reader. Book cradles distributed the weight of massive volumes, while elbow levers, rests, or even wrist straps helped monks avoid hand strain. It was early ergonomics, monastic style. You watch as another scribe uses a similar setup. His cradle includes a built-in magnifier made from polished quartz, suspended from an armature and swaying gently as he reads. Every movement is deliberate, controlled, like he's navigating scripture with the precision of a watchmaker. A novice near the window uses a miniature cradle with weighted silk cords. Each page he turns is counterbalanced by the cord, which lifts just enough to keep the vellum from creasing. It's like watching someone handle butterfly wings with metal chopsticks. And here's a fringe fact for your sleepy mind: one abbey reputedly built a cradle with a rotating base so that the entire device could swivel 360 degrees, allowing monks to change posture or direction with minimal effort. This became known, unofficially, as the lazy reader's throne. You can't help but imagine monks slowly spinning in circles during a long afternoon of psalms. Historians still argue whether these contraptions were widely used or limited to particularly wealthy or inventive monastic centers. Some believe the elbow levers doubled as a kind of training tool, teaching scribes how to maintain optimal writing posture by keeping their arms aligned with the page. The monk helping you now demonstrates an even more elaborate setup: the rolling cradle. On small wooden wheels, it can be nudged gently closer or farther without having to lean. It's clunky, yes, but astonishingly effective. He pulls the book forward a few inches with a flick of his wrist, and it obeys like a trained ox. There's something soothing about the whole experience. No need to strain your back. No need to cradle the spine of the book like it's your firstborn. Just sit, rest your elbows, and read, slowly, reverently, page by hefty page. You realize that for monks who spent hours, sometimes days, in contemplative reading, this wasn't luxury, it was necessity. Without these inventions, their bodies would give out long before their minds ever could. You run your fingers along the edge of the cradle, feeling the notches worn smooth by centuries of readers. There's even a small carved emblem, perhaps a monastic maker's mark or a blessing. You can almost hear the creak of someone 100 years ago sitting in your very spot, flipping a page you're now seeing for the first time. Another monk finishes his session and folds the elbow levers inward with a satisfying wooden snap. He tucks the book back into its case and bows slightly to the cradle, as if thanking it for its service. You don't blame him. The light shifts. The air cools. A bell rings in the distance. You sit just a little longer, your elbows cradled perfectly, your back unburdened, your eyes drifting toward the edge of the page. In this moment, it's just you, the words, and the slow, quiet swing of the reading arms. You're so relaxed in the cradle that you almost miss the curious sight across the hall, a monk standing upright at a desk, flipping through a book nearly as wide as his shoulders. He isn't pacing, and he isn't reading over someone's shoulder. He's just standing. Perfectly still. Focused. For what appears to be a very long time. Another monk joins him, also standing. Then another. No one sits. You cross the room, intrigued, and discover an entire aisle of standing desks, each one paired with a wedge-shaped wooden bench that looks too narrow to sit uncomfortably, and that's precisely the point. These are the standing librarians, and this is their domain. One scribe notices your confused expression and gestures toward the nearest bench. You can sit, he says, but you won't enjoy it. You try. It's like perching on the corner of a chopping block. Your thighs scream. Your spine curves at a scolding angle. After 60 seconds, you're standing again, and now you understand. The bench wasn't built for comfort. It was built to make standing preferable. Here's your mainstream fact: many medieval libraries included standing desks for practical reasons. Reading upright allowed monks to handle oversized or chained books more easily, prevented fatigue from prolonged slouching, and discouraged dozing during long hours of study. You couldn't nod off mid-page if you had to balance to stay upright. In wealthier monasteries, standing readers were even positioned near windows for natural light, ideal for detailed copying or verifying scripture. Their workstations were usually angled, tall, and braced against the wall, with side rests for scrolls or note slates. You watch a monk adjust a book by leaning into a small wooden armrest bolted to the desk side. His quill is tucked behind his ear. He hums softly while working, shifting his weight from one foot to the other every few minutes, like a sleepy stork with a Latin degree. One younger monk struggles with his posture, clearly new to the job. An elder approaches and gently nudges his elbow into position, adjusting his feet like a dance instructor. Bend the knees. Spine long. Eyes soft. That's how the body reads. It's practically yoga. A fringe historical tidbit. Some abbeys had designated reading shifts at standing stations. Monks would rotate every hour to allow circulation and relieve back strain. In one recorded case, a sand timer was used to enforce break intervals, flipped by a bell ringer whose job was to keep the upright scholars from toppling over. Historians still debate whether standing desks were the dominant method in scriptoria or merely supplemental for certain reading tasks. Some argue they were originally created for shared use, easier to step into quickly and return to between other duties. You spot one particularly elaborate standing desk shaped like an angled cabinet. It holds two books side by side, one opened, one closed, beneath a glass windowpane to protect a delicate page. A hinged arm at the side holds an ink bottle. Another keeps the reader's notes balanced at chest level. It's not just a desk. It's a reading cockpit. You rest your hands on the worn wooden edge, imagining the thousands of elbows that have leaned here before you. Each of them standing, squinting, enduring the slow ache of gravity in pursuit of something sacred. One monk, clearly well practiced, leans forward with such fluidity that the desk seems to move with him. He finishes a line, makes a small mark, then glances up at the window light and says, "Another hour, I think." You don't ask how he knows. You simply nod, as if you've learned to feel time in your shins. Around you, the room sways with a strange rhythm, monks rising, shifting, leaning. No chairs scrape. No stools creak. It's a quiet ballet of bodies adjusting to the book, not the other way around. And then the bell chimes. Several monks roll their shoulders, bow to the page, and step away. A few remain, motionless, still lost in the text. You return to your cradle seat and sit slowly, grateful for a moment of rest. Across the room, the standing librarians remain exactly where they are, tall, silent, unwavering. Their feet may be sore, but their minds are awake. You stretch your legs and take a slow breath, the kind you didn't realize you needed. The cradle chair has spoiled you. Your back finally remembers what alignment feels like. But now you're curious again. If monks stood for hours reading and copying, what happened to their backs? Their necks? Their wrists? The answer appears in the form of Brother Evo, walking past with a peculiar woolen harness strapped around his shoulders. It crosses his back, loops under his arms, and ties at the waist with a bit of leather. He looks like a monk preparing for a particularly well-organized tug-of-war. Posture belt, he says, catching your stare. It's less fashionable, more necessary. Welcome to the world of back braces and binding belts, the medieval librarian's version of preventative medicine. You follow Brother Evo down a hallway lined with shelves and into a small side chamber that smells faintly of lavender, beeswax, and liniment oil. A low bench sits beneath a window, beside a stack of folded cloth harnesses and wooden backboards. This is, as it turns out, the reading infirmary, not for books, but for bodies. Here's your mainstream historical fact: prolonged reading and copying of texts, especially large, heavy ones, took a physical toll on monks. Their tasks were physically demanding, often requiring hours of stillness in unnatural positions. Some monasteries developed support garments, braces, or padded equipment to relieve the strain on joints and spines. You sit as a novice fits a brace across your shoulders. It pulls you upright, not uncomfortably, but firmly, like a mother straightening your shirt collar before Mass. Your spine realigns. Your breathing changes. And suddenly, you understand how a monk could sit with one book for 10 hours straight and still rise without needing a stretcher. You notice another device, a long wooden slat padded with linen and designed to rest between the chair and a reader's back, forcing a straight posture. It looks like the medieval ancestor of ergonomic lumbar support, complete with a strap to keep it snug. It even has a hook to hang it when not in use. Brother Thomas fell asleep once, says Evo. Face first. Left a nose print on Leviticus. Now he wears the brace. Fringe detail of the hour. In certain monasteries, posture training was part of a novice's early instruction. Before being allowed into the scriptorium, they had to pass a week-long series of reading drills: sit, lean, copy, stand, under supervision. Some even walked with balanced slates on their heads to develop steady necks. The original book balancing act. Historians still argue whether these braces and habits were widespread or a regional oddity. But enough references exist in marginalia and monastic notes to suggest that at least some scribes were aware of their physical limits, and found creative ways to manage them. You try copying a short passage from an illuminated text, just to test the setup. With your brace tightened and the desk at a comfortable tilt, it's surprisingly smooth. You feel focused, anchored. There's a rhythm in the movement of hand to page that quiets the mind. Brother Evo peers over your shoulder and nods approvingly. See? The body writes with the spine. Keep that straight, and the words come easier. You chuckle. Is that scripture? No, he says, smiling. It's experience. Nearby, another monk adjusts a woolen sling wrapped around his wrist. Scribes cramp, he explains. After the third hour, the fingers curl. After the fifth, the ink runs. He dips his hand in warm water and flexes it slowly. A padded sleeve lies beside him, filled with herbs and stitched with tiny crosses. For protection, he adds. Whether he means the herbs or the prayers, you're not sure. A few monks take turns lying flat on padded benches after long copying sessions, spinal relief stations, in a way. One mumbles, half asleep, "Wake me when the psalms are shorter." You step back out into the hall, shoulders straighter now, spine warm and gently tugged upright by the brace. The change is subtle, but noticeable. All around you, monks walk with a slight lean, but not from defeat. From balance. They've built systems, quiet, clever, almost invisible, that let them endure the weight of books bigger than their chests. And not just endure. Thrive. As you exit the infirmary and re-enter the main library chamber, a soft mechanical creaking catches your ear, unlike the natural wood groans of desks or carts. This sound is deliberate, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You follow it past the pulpit desks and book cradles to a wooden structure that seems entirely out of place. It looks like a miniature Ferris wheel built by a carpenter with too much time and too many theology books. A monk, short and beaming with pride, turns to you. "Ah," he says. "You found the book wheel. And what a marvel it is." Constructed of oak, perhaps chestnut, the book wheel consists of a large vertical wheel with wooden shelves arranged along its rim. Each shelf holds an open book. The wheel is balanced on a central axle and can be turned with a crank, allowing any book to rotate into reading position without disturbing the others. The monk gestures proudly. 6 books, all at once. No lifting. No losing your place. Just spin and read. You give the crank a try. It's heavier than you expect at first, but then it glides smoothly, clicking as it locks into place. The next book eases into view, a commentary on the Gospels, its pages stiff but beautifully illuminated. You lean closer, enchanted. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the book wheel was invented in the Renaissance period, but the idea began germinating earlier in the late Middle Ages. As books multiplied and scholarly work grew more complex, so did the need to consult multiple texts at once. The book wheel allowed scholars to cross-reference passages without stacking tomes like a Jenga tower of judgment. The most famous designs included stop mechanisms that kept the books level as they rotated, like trays in a Lazy Susan that refused to spill their contents, no matter how dramatically you spun them. While rare, these devices became a staple in advanced scriptoria and universities. Nearby, another monk adjusts the wheel supports using a leather strap and a wedge. "Last week it tilted," he mutters. "2 psalters nearly collided with a dictionary." You chuckle. Here's a fringe tidbit: one abbey reportedly used a double-sided book wheel, with a second ring of miniatures for quick access to glossaries and footnotes. It became known as the Wheel of Wisdom, until it rolled out of balance during a storm and knocked over half a wall of chained books. The monks rebuilt the wall. And the wheel. Historians still debate whether book wheels were actually used in the average monastery or were more symbolic of scholarly prestige. Some argue they were too complex and costly for widespread use, others suggest they were just rare enough to remain legendary. You watch a scholar, older, with calloused fingers and fogged glasses, spin the wheel halfway around, landing on a botanical manuscript. He reads slowly, murmuring the Latin under his breath, then nods, spins again, and checks a herbal glossary 1 tier up. To you, it looks like a slow, deliberate dance. Another wheel nearby is smaller, built more like a gear than a Ferris wheel. It holds 3 books only, but each platform has an adjustable clasp that keeps the book open to a fixed page. For debates, the monk explains. Or arguments about dates. You picture a room full of monks furiously cranking their wheels, pointing at footnotes, and you smile. You get a chance to sit beside one and flip gently through a folio of saintly biographies. Every time you want to verify a cross-reference, you just rotate a bit. No stacking. No reaching. Just, click, and the next book arrives like a train at a very polite station. The sound of the crank, the click of the latch, the gentle thud of a page settling, together, they form a soft symphony. The room feels less like a library and more like a clock tower of thoughts, each wheel turning in time with the reader's breath. And something in that rhythm, the spin, the stillness, the choice, feels like magic. You sit in silence for a while, listening to the creak of wheels and the flutter of old pages. Around you, monks lean in toward their reading machines, absorbed, content. Books no longer weigh them down. They revolve. You leave the spinning marvels of the bookwheel chamber and find yourself following the narrow corridor that leads toward the outer cloisters, less polished, less formal, and somehow even quieter than the rest of the monastery. The scent of moss clings to the walls here, and faint drafts whistle through the arrow-slit windows. It's here, at the far edge of the compound, that you meet Brother Ranulph, barefoot, slightly winded, and tightening the straps on what can only be described as a folding bookshelf worn like a backpack. He nods at you. "Traveling light," he says, though his back appears to disagree. This is your introduction to a different breed of librarian, the wandering scholar, and the clever, if comically overloaded, method by which medieval thinkers carried knowledge on the go. You offer to help him adjust the leather harness, which holds two medium-sized books strapped tight across his back like wooden shields. A third text, smaller, is tucked into a cloth satchel worn across his chest. "This one's for sleeping," he says. "Short prayers. Lighter dreams." You blink. He's serious. Here's your mainstream fact: while many books were chained or stored securely in monastic libraries, scholars, friars, and messengers often needed to carry texts between abbeys, courts, and universities. Portable bookcases, often leather-wrapped wood panels with straps, allowed them to do so, though rarely with any degree of comfort. Ranulph points to a wooden slat he wears against his lower back. It's curved slightly to match the spine, with notches on each side for tying bindings. It helps distribute the weight, he explains. Until it doesn't. The journey wasn't just physical, it was strategic. He shows you his book blanket, a roll of wool stitched with sleeve-like pockets where scrolls and small volumes could be slid in, then rolled tightly and slung across the body. It's brilliant. And wildly impractical on rainy days. Here's a fringe tidbit for your growing medieval trivia collection: there were recorded cases of traveling monks sewing manuscript pages into their robes, either as hidden scripture, extra insulation, or, in one case, to avoid import taxes while crossing borders. Nothing says dedication like wearing your theology under your tunic. Historians still debate whether these mobile reading kits were standardized or cobbled together with local materials. Some manuscripts even came with built-in handles, little loops stitched into the spine like a suitcase. You imagine someone tripping over a root while trying to balance the collected letters of St. Augustine and quietly sobbing into the dirt. Ranulph sits on a low stone bench, carefully unfastening one book from his side rig. He opens it on his knees, revealing tightly written lines in brown ink and a pressed flower marking a page. "Marginalia," he says with a tired grin. "The only thing that keeps me company when the goats ignore me." You learn that traveling scholars like him were often the first to test books outside controlled library settings, fields, hillsides, uncomfortable wooden carts. Their feedback sometimes informed how books were bound or protected. One abbey even commissioned an entire set of texts bound in waxed leather with bone toggles, purely for travel durability. You ask if he's ever lost one. "Only once," he says. "Dropped it during a storm. Found it a day later. Upside down. Dry. God loves parchment." You believe him. A younger friar approaches, carrying a slim codex wrapped in oilcloth. "For Master Arnulf in Cannes," he says. Ranulph tucks it behind his belt like it's just another loaf of bread. Then, slowly, he stands, knees popping audibly, and straightens his shoulders. "I go at dawn," he says. You follow him back to his room, where his books are lined up not on shelves, but hung, from pegs, ropes, and hooks nailed into the beams. One dangles above his cot like a very scholarly lantern. It's clear these books are meant to move. To survive mud, wind, time, and poorly paved footpaths. They may not weigh as much as the giant tomes in the main library, but out here, under rain and sky, they feel just as precious. As you step back into the cloister, you glance once more at the folded case on his back. It creaks as he moves, but doesn't sway. A small ribbon trails behind him, catching the last light of day. Books that walk. Knowledge with feet. And somewhere in the distance, another bell begins to ring. The bell's fading echo guides you back inside the monastery, where a spiral staircase hugs a narrow tower wall like ivy. You ascend slowly, trailing your fingers along the cool stone, the steps uneven and worn like ancient teeth. By the time you reach the top, your legs ache, but the view is worth it. You step into a turret-shaped room, round, wood-paneled, filled with narrow stained-glass windows and dizzying verticality. This is no ordinary library. This is a vertical archive, built upward instead of outward to accommodate the monastery's expanding collection of large-format texts. Welcome to the world of libraries with ladders, ramps, and rails. Directly in front of you, a monk ascends a tall wooden ladder that glides along a rail, much like a medieval bookshelf on wheels. He stops halfway up and hooks his foot through a rung, freeing both hands to retrieve a particularly tall volume from an upper shelf. He grips it like a baby goat. Gently. Warily. You glance at the shelves, 10 feet high, 12 in some places, stacked with volumes bound in leather the color of dried figs and hazelnuts. Their titles, handwritten in ink, arch down the spines in Latin phrases that seem to glow faintly in the stained light. Here's your mainstream fact: in monastic libraries where floor space was limited, vertical storage became not just practical, but essential. Shelves were built high into vaulted spaces, with ladders, rails, and spiral ramps providing access to the more elevated tomes, especially the large ones that couldn't be stacked horizontally without damage. You're handed a rope. Just in case, the librarian says cheerfully, tying one end around your waist as you step onto the lower rung of a swaying ladder. It's not for drama, it's policy. As you climb, you notice small chalk marks etched beside certain books, arrows, stars, the occasional sad face. Those are warnings, the monk below explains. Mostly for weight. Some of those bindings don't forgive clumsy fingers. You reach a high shelf and spot a thick manuscript with metal studs and a decorative clasp. You try to pull it out. It doesn't budge. Rails, the monk calls up. Pull, then lift. Don't tilt. Sure enough, the shelf includes a hidden rail system, simple wooden runners that allow a book to slide forward before being removed. It's the kind of detail you wouldn't think of unless you'd spent half your life trying not to drop a psalter on your foot. Back on the ground, you're shown the inclined ramp, a wooden track that curves down gently from the second level to the main floor. The monk demonstrates by placing a closed book, properly wrapped in a leather sleeve, at the top and letting it roll slowly downward, guided by a soft fabric rail. It glides with perfect grace, landing in a padded tray below. Delivery system, he says. For the too tired and the slightly scared. You pass a corner where a pulley hoist is mounted into the ceiling. A rope basket hangs from it, creaking slightly. That's for returning books to the upper shelves, the monk says. We don't let just anyone use it. Last year, a visitor thought it was for soup. A fringe historical tidbit. Some vertical libraries used color-coded shelf edges to help identify weight zones. Red for light, blue for moderate, black for dangerously heavy, don't even think about it. One famous tale tells of a monk who moved a black-tagged book alone and cracked a bench clean in half. The bench was repaired. The monk changed careers. Historians still debate whether these vertical systems were widespread or only found in resource-rich institutions. But surviving architectural sketches suggest many monasteries had at least one tower room dedicated to height-based shelving. You sit on a small platform built into the corner, taking in the strange beauty of it all, books lined from foot to ceiling, ladders tucked neatly into grooves, quiet monks climbing like scholarly squirrels. One friar crosses the upper beams via a narrow wooden catwalk. He balances a book under one arm like it's a sacred loaf of bread, muttering something about concordances and stiff hinges. Below him, another monk gently guides a book back up the incline, tethered to a rope and pulley system that swings like a slow pendulum. You realize that this place is not only a library, it's an ecosystem. Every part moves, breathes, balances. Rails, ropes, ramps, ladders. Knowledge suspended in air, accessed by patience and careful footing. You close your eyes briefly and imagine the whole tower turning like a massive book wheel, its contents rotating gently toward the future. But no, everything here stays put. Only you move. And only slowly. You descend the spiral stairs one careful step at a time, legs shaky but heart oddly full. Something about that turret, the weightless ascent, the gliding books, the ropes and rails, felt like a dream carved in wood. But now you return to the base of the monastery library, to a much quieter room where things don't move at all. Here, the air is still. The floor is smooth. The only sound is the faint whisper of a page being turned, slowly, reverently. In the center of the room sits a single monk, old enough that his robe seems to weigh less than his years. He's hunched over a final volume, one so large it covers nearly the entire desk in front of him. He's not copying it. Not indexing it. Just, reading. One page at a time. With both hands. You approach without speaking, drawn to the book's sheer presence. Its cover is cracked leather, darkened by oil and age. Brass corners glint in the torchlight. A simple ribbon marks the reader's place. He senses you and smiles gently without lifting his head. Started it in spring, he murmurs. Finishing now. He turns the page with effort, like lifting the wing of a grounded bird. The vellum resists slightly, thick and stiff, but yields. The sound it makes is soft and heavy, like a sigh through a curtain. Here's your mainstream fact: some books, especially final compendiums of theological thought or multivolume encyclopedias, were designed to be permanent residents of their desk. They were not for reference. They were for completion. To read a massive manuscript from start to finish was a rare, devotional act. You sit across from him as he continues. He doesn't rush. He pauses between passages. Sometimes his lips move. Sometimes he rests his hand on the page, not to hold it down, but to feel it. To be still with it. Around the edges of the room are other volumes, waiting. Not chained. Not stacked. Just resting on padded boards, covers slightly open as if they too are reading him in return. A fringe detail. Some monasteries believe that the act of finishing a particularly dense book should be followed by silence. No celebration. No announcement. Just a moment of stillness to acknowledge the passing of time, and the turning of knowledge from unread to understood. Historians still argue whether this was tradition or just monastic lore, but several marginal notes have been found reading simply, finished, and quiet. The monk reads a final line, nods, and closes the book with both hands. The thud is soft but absolute. He folds the ribbon back inside, then presses his palm against the cover. For a few seconds, neither of you moves. Then he exhales and says, "It never gets lighter." He doesn't mean the book. You help him rise. He leaves the book where it is, centered, still, satisfied. As he walks away, his steps are slow, but not weary. Measured. As if he's pacing himself for something new, even if it's only a return to his cell and a well-earned nap. You remain, seated in front of the closed volume. You trace a finger along its spine, feeling the indentations from countless reeds. You think of every device you've seen, the pulpit desks, the elbow levers, the creaking cradles, the book wheels, the rope lifts, the secret shelves. All of them designed to carry what the mind craved and the body couldn't always bear. And here, at the end, none of that matters. Only the reader. Only the words. Only the silence. You lean back and let it all wash over you. The hush of paper. The warmth of wood. The slow, heavy weight of memory. And now, as your body softens and your eyes begin to close, imagine yourself in that final room again. The flickering torchlight casting long shadows on ancient walls. The scent of wax, dust, and ink holding steady in the cool air. And in front of you, just one book. Its cover warm from your hands. Its story nearly done. Breathe slowly now. Let your shoulders release. Let your back sink into stillness. You've walked a long path through stone libraries and cloistered halls. You've stood beside monks hunched over desks, felt the weight of leather-bound volumes resting in wooden cradles, and listened to the steady creak of ancient knowledge moving gently through time. Now, everything quiets. The chains stop rattling. The wheels stop turning. Even the bells in the distance seem to wait. There's nothing else to read. Nothing else to lift. Only rest. So allow your thoughts to slow, like the turning of a page. Allow your breath to drift, like a bookmark lowering into place. You've seen the end. And now, you get to be still. May your dreams be filled with soft parchment, golden letters, and the gentle creak of a desk that knows your shape. You don't have to carry the book anymore. Let it rest. Let you rest.